Greetings and welcome to this edition of Campus Conversations. I'm Dan Mogulof from the university's Office of Communications and Public Affairs. Today we're going to be discussing and exploring the issues and challenges that are impacting mental health, our mental health and well-being, including stress, burnout, and the ever-shifting sands of the pandemic. We're fortunate to have an exceptional panel of campus experts with us today to help us navigate these complicated waters and to provide all of us with information about sources of support and about what we can do for ourselves. Dacher Keltner is a professor of psychology and the faculty director of the Greater Good Science Center. His research focuses on the biological and evolutionary origins of compassion, awe, love, beauty, and humility, as well as power, social class, and inequality. Dacher is the author of several hundred scientific articles, several books, including Born to be Good, The Science of a Meaningful Life. Dacher, glad to have you here today.
It's good to be with you.
Christina Maslach is an emerita professor of psychology and a researcher at the university's Healthy Workplaces Center. She is also the pioneering research whose work led the way on the definition, predictors, and measurement of job burnout. In fact, the most widely used instrument for measuring job burnout is known as the Maslach Burnout Inventory, MBI. Christina has written numerous articles and books, including The Truth About Burnout and The Burnout Challenge. And in 2021, she was named by Business Insider as one of the top 100 people transforming business. Christina, welcome aboard.
Pleasure to be here.
And last but certainly not least, Dr. Peter Cornish is the university's Director of Counseling and Psychological Services and an honorary research professor at the Memorial University of Newfoundland. His clinical and research interests include online mental health service innovations, and what are known as stepped care treatments, a particular area of interest and expertise for Peter, which perhaps we'll talk about later. As always, we want and welcome your questions as we go along. Just paste them to UC Berkeley's Facebook Live site, and we'll do our best to respond. So folks, let's start by just going around the room. Dacher, we'll start with you, and Christina, if you could follow up. Share with us what you're seeing. It's just been this crazy ride, and I always think about the data graph on the New York Times that shows the cases, the spikes and the valleys, and I sort of feel like our collective and individual mental health is sort of tracked that roller coaster, which is what it looks like. But that's my impression. Dacher, what do you see? What are you thinking about? What are you experiencing right now?
Yeah, I see this as really, what I'm seeing, I saw in my office hours with Berkeley students yesterday. I had 10 students come by. It was exhilarating. And there's a lot of struggle from the 2 years of being on Zoom and online. And that converges with a recent Lancet publication, one of the best medical journals, showing worldwide about a 20 to 25% rise in depression and anxiety, especially among 20-year-olds. But I really see this as an opportunity that, we've been seeing these trends in our culture in terms of rising stress and loneliness and disconnect and, dysphoria in different ways. And so it's a great chance for Berkeley to lead changes, right? To think, reconceptualize how we approach mental health. And, and with those Berkeley students, I'm getting them every weekend, in my happiness class to get outside and watch the sunset and go think about light and listen to the laughter of your friends. I had a student whose praises I will sing, who gave away 100 chocolates for Valentine's Day yesterday, just in the spirit of gratitude. He said, it almost changed my life. So I think we have to kind of rethink how we enter into this new phase of the endemic, if you will. So I think it's hard stuff that I'm seeing, but a lot of opportunity.
So before we go on to Christina, I want to follow up. So it sounds like these crazy last 2 years haven't really kind of lit off a light bulb about new things. It's really reinforcing things that you've been thinking about and been emphasizing for a long time. Do I have that right?
Yeah, Vivek Murthy, our Surgeon General, loneliness is an epidemic. It has been for, Robert Putnam bowling alone for 30 or 40 years. It's fundamental as a health challenge to our society. So the pandemic worsened that social condition. Now what do we do, right? Assertively. And so, yeah, I think that one of the interesting things about the pandemic is it probably amplifies pre-existing tendencies in certain ways. And one was loneliness, too much time online being another. And so I think we have to take those on.
All right, we're going to circle back in a little bit and talk more about this idea that there's opportunity embedded within a crisis that we're facing, because that's a really interesting subject. But Christina, let me come to you with the same sort of question. From your very unique perch and from the perspective of your expertise, what are you seeing and noting right now, and how are you doing?
Not being able to go out, unfortunately. But I agree with the roller coaster, the ups and the downs. And I think what I've noticed from the beginning is that there have been things that have been really difficult and challenging and depressing and all of that kind of thing. And at the same time, I noticed more when it started than more recently, but people were rediscovering their friends and their relatives and whatever, because they started having Zoom calls that they'd never had before. Yeah. People were stuck at home and going down into the basement and finding old family photos and sharing them and so there was also some interesting rethinking of what we were not doing personally, but we could do in another way. So there was a kind of a flowering, I thought, and I still think we can mine that, kind of thing, in the sense of people discovering other ways in which you could connect and be still engaged and whatever. In terms of job burnout in the workplace, I sort of echo a little bit what Dacher said before, and that is that burnout was not new, in these recent years, although it's almost become the nom du jour, for the whole pandemic. Everybody is experiencing burnout and using the term to mean anything that's negative and can't deal with it. But it was around for a long time. And the other thing that has been around for a long time were unhealthy workplaces. In other words, we've known for a long time what makes people stressed, what makes them leave, what makes them sick in terms of their work environments. And if I can give a little bit of a silver lining to the pandemic, it made it much more visible. In addition to what we already knew, now we have a couple more reasons why it's unhealthy. You can't be next to people. You can't be in enclosed spaces, all of these kinds of things. And so there's been a really renewed interest in how do we rethink how we work, where we work, how this whole thing goes. And so in some sense, I think the thing about we're not going back to the new, to the old normal, it's a new normal, but we still have a lot to figure out. And I do think that, in terms of people not going back to work, not wanting to go back to work in the same way, wanting to negotiate different things, wanting to find a better job, the mantra that I always heard before the pandemic was the job is what it is. You can't do anything about it. So you're just going to have to step up to the plate and cope. And the pandemic showed us the job doesn't have to be what it is. It can change. We can do it differently. We did it differently in lots of ways. Some of them worked, some of them didn't work. But the point was wait, there's something better out there. There must be something better. I could do it differently. I don't have to commute. I don't have to do all of these other things. So I think we're, poised to really be more creative and think out of the box on this than we were before.
Okay, so far I'm doing the tally, and that's hope 2, despair 0. That's a good way to start. Peter, you have a unique perch as the director of counseling services for the university, and obviously have a mixed clientele, staff, faculty, and students. So from that vantage point, how does it look to you? Do you have this same sort of sense that there's opportunity before us during these difficult days?
Well, I won't be the wet blanket. So, I think of this, a crisis like this magnitude as a time of multiple reckonings. And, we've had multiple crises overlapping, and we're, in the midst of a long overdue racial reckoning. I think we are in the midst of a reckoning around how we do work, where we do work. I think we're in a a reckoning on social connectedness. And so it's a bit of a wake-up call. And, I think the reality is there are some people that have really suffered through this, people with less privileges and opportunities. We know that mental health typically is more challenging for people with disadvantages, vulnerable populations, women, people with poor general health, those from low income and historically marginalized populations. And we see that with our students. For myself, I have this sort of a back and forth dynamic with my wife, who is in Canada, and her move down to California has been delayed partly by the pandemic, but she's also had less fortunate experiences over the past year, including a heart attack. And meanwhile, she sees me in this industry of mental health. There's huge demand. There's a hunger for innovation now. There's a wish to kind of transform, much in the way that Dacher is suggesting, is that, there are things that are low-hanging fruit, going for a walk, that we're waking up in my profession to say, in some ways, the emperor has no clothes. Not everybody has to go see a psychologist or a psychiatrist to be well. And there are structural conditions in workplaces and elsewhere that right now we're putting a lot of attention into, which is a good thing. That's a silver lining.
Great start. Before we go on, and I want to follow up with you, Peter, about students. Just for those of you who have joined us late, we're talking today with 3 campus experts about mental health. We're happy, as always, to take your questions. We welcome them. If you do have questions as we go along, just post them to UC Berkeley's Facebook Live site. Peter, let me come back to you. One of the things I'm struck by is that even before the pandemic, people on campus were talking about a mental health crisis among students. For those of us who may not have day-to-day contact with students, but care deeply about them as members of the campus community, what's the current state of affairs right now? What are you seeing?
I think of it more as a crisis of access. What we've seen over the past 20 years, it's not so much that it's a deterioration in the overall mental health. It's rather that people are starting to realize how important mental health is, and we see that in the curriculum in kindergarten and up, that mental health is talked about, and go and get help. I think the correction that we're involved in right now, and I'm so glad Dacher's on this call and Christina, is because the course correction is that we can't expect professionals to do all the work, and because wellness is not something that we have a lock on, or it's not a sort of a proprietary thing that psychiatrists and psychologists have. So we're seeing a lot of students asking for help, and they're asking for what they were told to ask for, which is go get counseling, go see a therapist, see a psychiatrist. And while that can be very, very helpful for almost everyone, it isn't necessary for many people. And so what we're really working on, instead of thinking of this as, oh my God, the students are all mentally ill, I like to think of it as people are really motivated to do something about wellness and change their circumstances, and let's make access easier to a broad range of resources, not just counselors.
Dacher, how does that sound from where you sit?
I mean, I think it's a fundamental shift, as Peter is saying, which is that to start to think about all the wisdom that human cultures create, and around wellness and community, and really to amplify that here in the United States and in Berkeley. So you're seeing really precipitous rises in things like mental health apps, right? Podcasts like 10%. The Greater Good Science Center is distributing, wellness practices that are science tested to hundreds, if not thousands, of schools. And teachers are like, this is exactly what we need to be doing, is just to weave it into the fabric of our day. So I think that, I think there's this, as Peter was saying, a reconceptualization of what does it mean to be well, and to think about the low-hanging fruit and the new ways, the innovative ways to build this into our lives. And work life as well is fundamental, as Christina has been arguing for decades. So.
Got it. Christina, please.
Yeah, one of the things I would like to sort of add to all of this is that what we have been dealing with, and unfortunately we're still dealing with it, is that when people talk about mental health, there is a tendency to point the finger and say, what is wrong with you? And so it becomes an individual, internal, my problem, my weakness, oh my gosh, I don't dare share it with anybody because then they'll think less of me, they'll shun me, I won't, da 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 da. And that's happened with things like job burnout. And even though the World Health Organization made it very clear, this is not a medical disease. It's not an illness.
You mean burnout is not a...
Burnout is not. People treat it as though it is. And there is a sense in which, well, what's wrong with you? You should see a therapist. You need some medication. Maybe you should quit the job or, go somewhere or take some time off. It's something wrong with you. And so the shift that I think is coming and is changing in some places is to get to more of a we focus rather than a me, focus, that it's burnout and other kinds of stresses, and it's a stress response, are in response to chronic things out there in the environment, in the social world. And the fact that we're doing it is a tribute to the way human beings are designed. Stress protects you, but if you're under stress all the time, it begins to harm you. So, it's if we can think more of sort of social care and how do we make the environment better? How do we improve how the school day goes? How do we do things that make the workplace a healthier, better environment where, people are really thriving, rather than getting beaten down. So I really applaud the greater focus that's been on this, on mental health, and even, with Olympics and Olympic people before talking about the stress of that. It's saying the environment, those outside stressors, pressures are the things that are the problem. So the question should be, how do we change that?
Yeah.
How can we modify? How can we improve things so that it's actually helping us, do well? So I just wanted to make that clear that that stereotype that mental illness is an individual failing is still strong, unfortunately.
So there's something that's striking about what you're saying, or maybe I've got it wrong. I'd like each of you to sort of weigh in on this. It seems on one hand, you're saying these are chronic conditions and maybe just the pandemic has shined a brighter light, brought them to the fore. But at the same time, we're seeing data and indications that there are an increase in certain pathologies and depression and whatever, and that there is a unique effect. So how do we tease that apart? Is this just a matter of things we've known that have been stressors or weaknesses or frailties in our work setup, in our lives, and access to mental health that have been exposed? Or is there also something going on here that's being driven by the pandemic itself that'll be transient? Christina, let me come right back to you with that, and I'm going to ask Dacher and Peter to weigh in on the same thing.
Oh, yeah. No, I think that what has happened during the pandemic is that in addition to everything else that was going on in our lives that were stressors and things beforehand, it just added more, and it changed it in ways that for some people more than others completely disrupted and overthrew the life they knew and what they could do. I think of people, particularly in healthcare occupations, particularly in teaching occupations, for example, people who are, frontline workers and stuff like that. What you now suddenly have to do without warning, without prep, to do your job well and connect with people and whatever, just, sometimes it was just disastrous. And people made do and, hung in there and stuff like that. But the toll that it's taken on people in some of these positions has been, horrendous. And the people we've lost, and the people, not just to the disease, but we are losing. And I think I'm really afraid about the future, how many we are going to lose who have already said, I'm not going back to a healthcare job ever. I am not going to go back and teach elementary school again, because it was not the way the teachers wanted and could and knew how to really engage with students and so forth. So yeah, it added a lot. Is it helpful to say it's having a bad effect and we need to figure out ways that we can do a better job of helping people cope? Yes, and all of that is absolutely true. But in addition, we need to think of how do we make a lot of these many worlds that we inhabit during our life a little bit better so that we don't have to, cope with this all the time.
Got it. Dacher, same sort of question, that kind of balance, or how you think about what's unique about the situation and to what extent has the situation simply shined a brighter light on chronic pre-existing issues in our society and our lives?
Yeah, terrific question, Dan. I think what's unique about the pandemic and why there's 20-25% rise in depression is loss, trauma. More people have been lost in the pandemic than the Korean War, World War II, and the Vietnam War for the United States. So it's a collective trauma. So that's going to hurt our mental health. But to Peter's point earlier, it also shines a light, as Christina is saying, on the structural issues that have cost the United States in terms of mental health. The day before we went on to remote, when the pandemic was breaking in Berkeley, I was teaching my human happiness class about how racism costs Americans, every American, in terms of mental health, our white supremacy issues, how inequality, huge effect on life expectancy, mental health in the United States, how loneliness, 35,000 long-term care facilities in the US and a lot of lonely people. Those were vulnerabilities that just took over in the pandemic. So it's both. It's something unique about this moment in history, this 2-year moment in history. And then this culture needs to fix some of those problems that other cultures don't encounter, that and show the mental health evidence of having worked through those issues.
Got it. Peter, I'm going to ask you the same thing before I do, just to remind people who joined us late. We're talking about mental health today with campus experts. We welcome your questions. They can be posted to Facebook Live. And after Peter weighs in on this latest round of questions, we're going to actually take some of the questions that have been coming in. But Peter, same question for you.
Yeah, I'm of two minds about this, because sometimes I have to do a bit of a check when I hear studies that report rises in anxiety or depression, because sometimes those are, self-reported symptoms that are expected. Because they're normative. In other words, why wouldn't you if you've had people dying and your life is upended? And so that's why I prefer not to see it as a mental health crisis. When I look at epidemiological data over the last 50 years, really nothing's changed when you rule out some of the confounding variables. Mental illness has been quite stable. So I take that with a grain of salt. What I do want to acknowledge is that distress for legitimate reasons, inequities, unfairness, oppression, racism, trauma, is real. And we don't want to, as I think, as Christina is saying, and Dacher, we don't want to blame people for that. And I think big pharmaceuticals have had on the agenda this idea that this is an illness that's internal, it's inside you. I think of a colleague and friend of mine who comes from Nigeria, and he said to me, Peter, in my country, mental illness is not from within. It's out there. It's things that are outside of the person, whether that be spiritual, black magic, or inequities and definitely environmental factors. I think the second thing out of this is when we take the mental health crisis idea and suspend it a little bit, it allows us to look for what capacities people do have and the resourcefulness and resilience that they have. And what we've transformed in our care with students right now is we've stopped asking, and this is the typical way that mental health care is provided. You ask people everything, you ask them to list everything that's wrong with them. So somehow that knowing all those things is going to help us to provide better care. But actually the research shows it doesn't, even diagnoses don't really help. And so instead you can also start asking what's working right. And that's what we're doing with our new one at a time approach. We have to acknowledge the stress and the difficulty, but we also want to help people to see and dig into the existing strengths and resources that they have.
You know, I lied. I said we're going to go to a question that came in, but I want to follow up. I want to follow up for a second. I mean, it sounds, but basically what you're saying, that the pandemic is having, from your perspective, a profoundly positive impact on the way you do what you do, on the way your profession, the mental health profession, is thinking about treatment and about people and the societal versus the individual. Do I have that right?
Yeah, so I mean, in Canada, there was a wish to set up a portal so that all Canadians could get immediate access to care. And so this came out of this sense of, my God, there's a crisis, we better do something. And so it was the silver lining is that there was an opportunity, because we're now seeing how difficult the difficulties that people are having through this crisis. So it really is an opportunity. California's put up billions of dollars for mental health. I just hope that we don't do the same thing. I mean, a crisis is an opportunity for us to say, wait a minute, maybe we shouldn't do the same thing as we did before.
Yeah.
Got it. Let me go to a question that's come in from the audience. And again, we welcome your questions. They can be posted to the UC Berkeley's Facebook Live site. Here's a question I'd like all three of you to weigh in on. This person asks, can you speak to mental health accommodations in the workplace? And here's the kicker, and how to have those conversations with supervisors. Christina, let me start with you on that one.
Oh boy, that's a great question. And it is the one that gets people shaking in their boots. I mean, because they often know, and they say, I go to my supervisor, go to my manager, whatever, if I say anything that suggests that I am having some sort of problem, and I cannot cope, and I'm weaker or somehow less competent or whatever, I'm taking a huge risk. I'm going to get off their list. I'm going to be dropped down. I'm not going to get a promotion. You know, it's risky to divulge, you know, and to say that I am feeling depressed, or I'm feeling I'm just not working well here, and et cetera. Ideally, supervisors are supposed to be working, you know, on behalf of their people. They should be the best advocate, you know, in some sense, for good working conditions, for help and advice. But I hear this all the time, because then it says, what's, you know, the boss or the manager will come back and say, what's wrong with you? There's somebody else over here who's not having that problem. So it's, you know, you reframe it as an individual, not just a need, but a negative mark about you, which you've now made public. And this happens, you know, with burnout and so forth. So that there's still that stigma about it, that asking for help isn't being treated as, oh yeah, of course, we need to do some other kind of things to think about what would make this right. And so you're doing well. It's always, how do we help this person? You know, do we refer them to the psychotherapist? Do we give them time off? Do we, you know, how to, you know, kind of thing. So that conversation doesn't just happen in the workplace, but it's really hard to have in a lot of places because of that stigma. So that's a huge, huge challenge.
So Dacher, what do you say to that staff person who's just really struggling and doesn't know how to open that conversation, get the conversation started with the supervisor? What would you advise that person?
Yeah, you know, and I think underlying my response to this really difficult question is what Peter's been saying, which is I think in part the workplace needs to broaden our conceptualization of mental health, right? And so I always segment, like, there are serious clinical issues. If you're having panic attacks every day, if you're not getting out of bed, really profound clinical issues, you have to advocate for that in the case of this worker. But what's happening a lot in the workplace, increasing, is broadening, you know, is to think about, you know, how can you build gratitude practices into your workplace? How can you structure healthy walks? How can you Do a little bit of yoga or meditation that's spreading. We know a lot about the benefits of those things, and they're easy to integrate into the workplace. So I think when we think about struggles and we start to broaden out and think about the classic mental quote illnesses, I don't like that word of anxiety, depression, but then think about this other complement of things we can do that workplaces can offer. I think we have a more robust response to the times.
Yeah. Peter, you must hear this a lot in your position from staff people. How do you counsel them about having these, what can be very difficult conversations with their supervisors and so that their needs can be met?
You might be able to imagine what a staff meeting is like when you have a whole bunch of mental health professionals together, or maybe you can't, but you can bet that there's a lot of talk about these kinds of questions and processing of these issues, and I find that I do best when I put myself in the role of student and learning from my staffs, and one of the things that that we have been doing in rebuilding the model of care is to make sure that there's this process of co-design in the changed care, where students and other stakeholders are helping us to build this. And one of my staff members in a meeting called me out on that when we were talking about the flexibility processes we were for hybrid work, particularly when Omicron came out, and they said, Peter, shouldn't, okay, that's an interesting idea that, you think we should all, nothing should change. We should all just come back for our 2 days remote. But what about the principle of co-design here? Shouldn't we have some input? And I said, okay, help me, tell me how you would design this better. And so what they ended up doing is coming with a great solution. They said, well, this other department is doing it this way, and could we do that? And so what I've noticed as I open up these conversations and allow the difficult conversations and allow that feedback is this, what we're building is what I call a culture of responsible autonomy. So staff need to have some autonomy and some agency in how their work unfolds, but the operations still have to run. And so what I do in these conversations is say, okay, interesting idea. What's your solution for how we can keep the operations running? As opposed to, yes, you have a right to take that time off. Of course, sometimes that's true, but instead bring me a solution that works for our collective responsibilities. And we can bend as leadership to any great idea we'll try to incorporate.
I'm really struck by something. I mean, my former career as a journalist, at some point, they made me a manager. I was a bureau chief overseas, and I didn't get any training at all about how to manage people. And so what do you guys think about that? About the extent that folks get put in management positions who are clueless about all the things we're talking about, right? Is there opportunity there? Is there anything being done about that? Dacher, you're nodding, and then we'll go to Christina and Peter on that question.
Yeah, this is one of the big cultural shifts right now. I do a lot of work with medical doctors who do, what you might call God's work during the pandemic. They're incredibly complex work, and they, and it's a very sophisticated education, and they don't get the science on how to handle the patient, doctor, physician's assistant, nurse interaction. And we know that benefits people's physical health. I'll give you another example, which is a little bit off topic with respect to Berkeley, but in a lot of police academies, they get more training on how to operate a gun than how to diffuse a conflict. They get no training on how to make for more cooperative relationships. And so, there's a lot of need for this, and opportunity and change. So it's profound.
Christina, you've been vigorously nodding.
It's one of the common things we have found in research over decades. And that is when we do assessments like of a large organization and sort of seeing where patterns of burnout or engagement, and then looking at where the mismatches, in terms of fairness and training and all this kind of stuff. Managers are in this sometimes the most stressful position because they're middle managers, and they've got somebody above and somebody below, in the hierarchy. And They are promoted to be a manager often because they're really good at whatever the organization does. It makes widgets. Okay, they're a great widget maker. I'm going to make you the director of this unit, etc., with no training on how you manage people and how you work with, the stressors, the challenges, how you deal with someone who's not doing well, how do you, all of that kind of thing. And, and they're not getting on with the people who were their colleagues. And now they have new bosses who are, not happy with what they're doing. And it comes down often to the fact that they have not actually been trained to do the job that they are supposedly trying to do well. And so we see those problems all the time. If I can give a little Berkeley example, actually, one of my colleagues, Shelley Zedek, years ago was chairman of a committee for the faculty, which is if you have a grievance and if you have a problem, you go to this committee and say, this is going wrong in my department, and can you intervene and stuff like that. And then they have like almost trials, and all this kind of thing. And he checked through all the data and he discovered that, the vast majority of the cases came down to the fact that the faculty who rotate all of us into chair positions in the department never got trained on how to be a chair of a department. We were hired for research and teaching and being real smart and all that kind of thing. But managing a department, we all take turns at it and we were lousy at it. And so they instituted on the campus as a result of that, a whole thing now of training new chairs, new deans to do their job, a lot of which is the people stuff, and dealing with other human beings. And the number of cases of complaints dropped dramatically once you did that kind of thing. So it speaks to your experience for sure. Yeah.
So Peter, want to give a report card to the campus? How are we doing on that front in terms of preparing people to be managers?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. I think I don't know if it's worse on the academic side or the administrative side, but I've played both sides and I'd say it's a tie. The good news is that there are a lot of resources on this campus for professional development of managers. And personally, what I'm doing, I have a coach right now that is an executive coach. I guess that's a highfalutin word for it, but somebody who knows management structures. And what we decided to do is that this person is coaching all of our leadership, one-on-one and sometimes at group meetings, because we discovered that one of the biggest problems is the way our leadership was structured. But it's not just the structure. We actually don't necessarily have the skills to manage. And what I'm delighted here is all of my managers were very quick to admit that. And so I think, there's, in my experiences, there's usually an openness to decide, nobody helped me with this. Please give me some resources.
Yeah.
All right, another question for the three of you that's come in. And again, folks, if you've joined us late, we welcome your questions as always. They can be posted to UC Berkeley's Facebook Live site. Here's the next one. Can you talk about the misconception of what mental health looks like? And I think this person means mental health treatment, because they go on to write, I often hear people focus on one-on-one therapy as the only solution, and that these people often give up if they don't have access to that. Dacher, let me start with you. So I think what this person's saying, like, I or maybe somebody I know has a mental health issue, and it seems like everything's always about go see a therapist. Are they right, or are there other options, Dacher?
Yeah, I mean, this feels like Peter's question too, very importantly, but and then you have to think about the cost of a lot of therapy and how that's prohibitive, and driving 40 minutes for it, and how do you schedule it during the day. So a lot of barriers to it. And what I'm really excited about at the Greater Good Science Center is 20 years of scholarship on how a little bit of breathing and mindfulness can reduce anxiety, how getting outdoors and finding awe in the trees, near trees, reduces depression and anxiety in older people, 75 years old and older. A recent paper from our lab, just a whole suite of things we can do that are low carbon footprint, very good for our nervous systems. And again, back to this theme that Peter got us thinking about early, like, let's reconceptualize, right? Let's not go in and ask your 22 problems right now, but also think about where the pockets of well-being. And so there's a lot that complement traditional therapy that people can do right now.
Before I go on to Peter, to follow up about what people can do who may not have
Yeah.
access or can't afford or aren't into the whole idea of therapy. Greater Good Science Center, resources posted online people can access?
Yeah, Greater Good Science Center. I know a lot of our listeners probably have checked it out. Greater Good is the essays. ggia.berkeley.edu has a whole bunch of research tested practices that help people with stress. We got hundreds of thousands of people using it in different ways. So go use it. It's free. It's a Berkeley original. We're very proud of it. So,
Wait, very cool. So Peter, your business and the people you oversee is about providing counseling and that exact sort of one-on-one therapy. But are you on board with this idea of, yeah, that's one avenue, but there are many others? Where do you fall out?
Absolutely. So I don't want to diminish the value of therapy. And for some people, that is probably the best option. But what we've found is when we offer a broader suite of resources, many people, in fact, most people won't choose therapy, even if it's free and immediate. In Canada, we've discovered this with the Wellness Together Canada portal, that even though you can get it within seconds, 24/7, most people are not choosing that. What I want is no barriers to any of these options. And as you broaden that suite, then it means that there is less of a wait time and a pressure for the individual therapy. I don't think we have to worry that if we suddenly offered free therapy to everyone, of course, we would have a lot of demand. But if you offered free therapy and the programs that Dacher is describing in a suite, we would be fine. There wouldn't be a tsunami of demand.
Interesting. Christina, anything to add to this about, mental health beyond the sort of classic one-on-one therapy session?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I'll be talking about this actually in the new book that I just wrote about job burnout, and really getting into how do you manage the relationship between people and their job. And there are at least 6 areas that we have found where a better fit or match, between people and the work actually makes a difference. And it's not just workload, and it's not just salary, what people usually kind of think, oh, we got to do something about that. But one of the big ones is the workplace community. And that means the people that you see and interact with and cross paths with, on a regular or semi-regular basis. Who are those people? Yeah. And when that group really begins to develop a lot of shared trust and fun and work and figuring out how to solve problems and neat lunches and basketball games or whatever, and builds those kinds of supportive relationships that when there's an emergency that comes up, they're ready to go in. They have my back, I have theirs, that sort of thing. So those kinds of, in the book we talk about a lot of little case studies, the low-hanging fruit. It doesn't have to change healthcare for the 21st century, but you can do things that make our interaction, make our experiences, make our laughter, make whatever, a more of a positive part of what we do all the time. And that's the sort of more, being part of a group that welcomes you, makes you feel like you're belonging, where you have chances to do something special, where you can, share a lot of what's going on in your life and get back a lot from others. It's a very reciprocal kind of process. And people can do that under the radar of management or whoever, you can sort of say, we can do some things differently. But we're seeing where people are forming these kind of social pods, sometimes over Zoom because they can't be together, but they're coming up with really interesting ways to stay in touch, to have fun, to help each other out with their work tasks, et cetera. And the more we can do things like that, I think it speaks to a social well-being, a community well-being, that we're all a part of, and that would really help.
Yeah,
I just have to weigh in. I can't agree more. I mean, I was doing this work during the pandemic with the Permanente Medical Group, just on bringing gratitude and joy and laughter and awe into these teams that were dealing with people dying alone of COVID. I mean, it was understaffed, and it was almost like war in some sense. I hate to use that analogy, but I mean, the innovations and the opportunities here, they were the surgeons having dance groups with their team for 3 minutes before they do stuff, telling stories about the wonder of their work, right? I mean, it was, so I think Christina's emphasis on rebuilding the elements of community in the work is a good anchor for us to be moving forward.
So let me ask, this has come up in different ways, and let me ask each of you about this question. Can we be mentally healthy in an environment where we're cut off from the full range of human interactions through Zoom, through all the rest? I mean, because I've been thinking about it too. It's like, I realize I'd much rather be on Zoom than sitting in a meeting in person with a mask on, where I'm constantly going, is that person smiling? Are they frowning?
Yeah.
It's like, what the heck is going on? I can't read. Other people are the exact opposite. Christina, let me start with you. I mean, how do you think about it? How should we think about this balance in this crazy world we're in suddenly, where we're choosing in person, online, all the rest of that?
Yeah, no, it's an excellent question, and I don't think we have all the answers yet. What I would like to encourage is a lot of experimentation and find out what kind of things that might work and what might not. So for example, I mean, I have been hearing throughout the pandemic when I talk with different people, sometimes like on the remote work that you're bringing up, people are saying, it's awful, it's difficult, and it's more so if you have little kids who are not, there's no childcare, there's no schools, there's, all of this kind of thing, or you don't live in a great place and you don't have all the resources and stuff. But for others, I would get positive things like, there was one lawyer that I talked to, for example, and he said, I miss kind of not going into the office, but I've been noticing that my interviews with my clients seem to be going better, or they're more successful. Do you think it's because I'm in my sweats? And I was saying, well, it could be because you're in your sweats, and maybe your client is too, instead of the suit and tie and the big, office thing. But it may be that you're also talking differently with this person who you now see in a different way. And it's not just the sweats, but it's the other thing about maybe more informal, better able to focus just on the issues and the question, not get distracted. There could be all kinds of reasons. So there are things like, why did this work better in this way than it used to? And can we keep it even if we have to go back to the office? But maybe there's only some things we should be doing in the office. Meetings could in fact be more effective on Zoom than they are, being physically present. But what are the things that are really important for us when, to come together and to actually share that? And what can be done at any time, or whatever, in different ways.
Yeah, Peter, I want to come to you with the same question, but I want to note beforehand that I was struck a couple of weeks ago reading newspapers one particular week, and it was students on one campus were protesting, are you kidding? You want us to be in person? We are not going back in person. Another university is, what? You want us to be remote? You won't let us go back on person? We demand that, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
What are you seeing and what are you thinking about, particularly in the higher education context, about this ever-shifting balance and sort of fluctuations between online, in person, and what's good for us, what's not? Help us.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think putting aside, although they're important, the fact that for different people with different levels of resources and opportunities, this will or will not land well. What I find is that we are experimenting right now. We're experimenting with, before the pandemic, my colleagues were saying, you can never do psychotherapy by video. I've been doing it for 10 years and trying to convince everybody that you can do it. Now, that's all people want to do. In fact, you cannot hire people. We're having a really hard time recruiting unless the first question they ask, can I work 100% remote? So, while working on Zoom and working remotely can pose lots of challenges, particularly for single parents and others who have other responsibilities at home and distractions, for the majority, what we're finding is they want to work at home. So then, how do you get that engagement? What I'm noticing is that when people do come into the office, they're so excited to see each other. They're excited to see students. I was in front of a group of students for the first time a couple of weeks ago, and it felt like so long that I had been in front of students. And that's what gives me energy, is the young students and their excitement. They want to be together. So I think the reality is that we've both are a combination are going to be amazing if we can find the right combination. It'll be different for different people.
Yeah, Dacher.
Yeah, the words experimentation and flexibility have come up, and I really hope we stay close to that. There's survey data coming out from Harris polling, and there's also a large-scale survey of college students. They want to be in person. And the Harris poll data say young people want to work in person, and for obvious reasons. And people over the age of 60, it's different, right? They like the comfort of home. And I think that's a really important notion to be thinking about. This really means different things for different people. Zoom does. Second one is the kind of work really is, it varies profoundly. Jeremy Fogel at Berkeley leads the Federal Judiciary Institute, or did recently. It's the education for judges. And, being a judge on Zoom, he believes, I agree, is a problematic version of democracy. If you're a family law judge and you're making a decision about whether a dad can see the kids or not, to deliver that over Zoom it's been a disaster. So I think we got to think really hard about age of person, individual differences kind of work to do these experiments right. Because I do worry. There are really solid data. The more screen time for young people, the more depressed. That's just, I start there. And then we got to work in a creative way.
Just had another question come in. It's a really good one. Peter, it's for you, but after Peter is done, Dr. Christina, if you want to weigh in, please do. It goes as follows. The campus seems to have substantial resources dedicated to researching how students are doing, anxiety, depression, stress, etc., but not enough resources towards program evaluations for services that address these issues. How does the campus expect to meet student needs better when they do not know the reason why students are or are not accessing campus resources? Peter.
I love that question. And I'm so happy to say that we're just about to stand up what we're calling, well, we're not sure if we'll have a better name for it, but the Center for Mental Health Innovation, which is going to be dedicated completely to program evaluation and bringing researchers from all over campus to take a look at this. For over the next 4 years, we have some external funding coming in to support this, and we also have had a lot of expressions of interest from independent researchers to be a part of that. So that is a part of the model that we're introducing right now. Is you have to be much more accountable. You have to be data driven, involve, get student input and voices. So the model is meant to evolve based on that data. So we're excited.
If you could change one thing, what is there low-hanging fruit out there, particularly in terms of support that we provide to students and staff, that we should be doing? If you could wave that wand and change one thing.
I think it is supporting staff, faculty, and students in a more, I guess, deliberate way on how to be mental health allies. And in other words, how to use your common sense to be caring people and not knee-jerk to, you must go see a therapist. People need to be given permission for that, and they need a bit of infrastructure to support them. And they need to know that we've got their back when they try to experiment with being part of the solution. So that is, so building up a structure. We're going to build up a training structure. We already have it, mental health ally training, but we also we do think the technology can help organize things. But to Dacher's point, the things we're going to organize are going to include walks in the park. In Canada recently, physicians can now prescribe free national park passes as a prescription for health and mental health. So that's the kind of thing we have to do. Some of this is easy.
Yeah. Dacher, I want to, Christina, please go ahead.
One thing I would sort of building on what you're saying is that there are things that we have taken in general and for granted in society as to who has to do what in terms of the work. And I think one of the things that got exposed in the pandemic in terms of working from home or schooling from home was that it falls very unevenly on people because somebody has a nice house or, has the money to buy a comfortable chair that's not going to make you, feel crippled when you get out of it, has access to childcare if you're going to, if you're doing work, has access to schools, all that kind of thing. It's basically the person has to outfit their place and pay for all the things they need in order to do their job. And so a lot of organizations and companies and stuff are getting, I hate to say it, a free ride because somebody else has built and pays and runs schools. And somebody else has built and run, and opportunities for childcare. And somebody else, has other kind of resources that they can bring to bear. So, but if it's work and it's part of what you're doing for this organization, there should be some other kinds of shared costs or investments, your uniform that you wear, now the home from which you have to do the work, the resources that allow families and single parents, and I hate to say that on a pandemic, women more than men were being hit in all of these areas, for these problems of school, of childcare, of whatever. So that it's not, the inequity just gets worse. And we really need to be shifting to sort of say, what do we provide? Free passes to the parks, I think, is great, but what else can we provide for people to do their job well, wherever they end up having to do it?
So unbelievably, we've burned up almost with really amazing stuff. So much food for thought here. One more question, then we'll do a closing round. And Dacher, let me give this last question to you that came in. And it's a question about what you see in your research regarding faith communities. Are some faith communities better than others? Does that play an important role? Talk a little bit about that, because it sort of takes us out of the workplace. We've been talking a lot, out of the classroom, into other societal and cultural institutions and opportunities. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm about to teach that tomorrow in my happiness class. I don't know about pandemic data, but being part of a spiritual community, a religious community, tends to benefit depression. So lower levels of depression, better life expectancy, a greater happiness. This has been observed in lots of different studies, large samples, replicated. And I think most people who do that research ask, what's the magic ingredient of that? And, part is believing in a higher power, perhaps, but a big part is what Christina talked about, which is community and getting together and singing together and, doing rituals and moving together, all have clear benefits to our immediate well-being. So that the challenge, for a lot of people in Berkeley who don't belong to these kind of communities is to create their own versions. And I think it's a challenge for our campus too, frankly. So
yeah. Not enough dancing and singing at Berkeley, that's for sure.
Yeah, I've got a proposal in my pocket. So,
so let me go around. Last question, Christina. I want to start with you. I'm really struck throughout this conversation, not just the content but the tone, that there's a certain, you all feel upbeat despite all this, that you have hope, and that we're going to make the best of what's been happening for the last 2 years. Really quickly, the basis for that hope, Christina, and what your hopes are in the next few months and years ahead as we emerge from this.
I guess my hope is that we can begin to see more possibilities and more options that we can share. And I really want to emphasize the sharing. It's not just about how do I take care of myself or what should I do, whatever. We seem to have lost over past decades more and more of this kind of shared social network. I really can't say social network anymore. The social blanket, that we've had, and it's been shredding in a lot of ways. And it's actually one of the things that we know is probably the best thing for human being and well-being and health, and that is other people.
Yeah.
No man or woman is an island, all of that kind of thing. And to the extent that we've been faced with having to have that shred even more, because we can't go and see people and we can't go and work with them in the same way. The point is that if we can figure out more new things that we can try, and people are working on it, that could actually help bring us together, that actually could provide some assistance, that actually that's that greater good, that social good, of all of us do well because of all the people that are around us and connected to us. And I'm optimistic that some new things came out while we were under siege in the pandemic. My hope is that we continue to pursue that more and be thinking more about who we are together. And rather than the divisiveness, the I go my own way, I can't speak to you about stuff, it brings in all the political stuff and whatever. But we have to get back to that, what I consider somehow a core value of being in this country, which was always, we are all people coming from all over, coming together to figure out a way to live together and support each other. And we're losing that, not just through the pandemic, through other things. But that's the greater good we really got to get to.
Yeah, thanks. That's beautiful and profound. Peter, what are you hopeful for, and what are you hopeful about, and what are you hoping for?
Well, I'm thinking of it, the tired expression, although we're going to resurrect it. It takes a village. The fragmentation. The solution for that is a process of synergy, where on my speed dial now, Dacher and Christina, we're going to get together and figure out a way not to make sure that the Greater Good Center and the work on burnout isn't fragmented itself, that we come together and build something that is valuing the contributions. The thing that excites me the most is when I discovered that for almost anyone that's struggling with stress or mental health issues, even those with severe diagnoses, the thing that can be so rewarding is giving, is helping others. And so that is magic, that we need to set conditions where people aren't just getting served, but simply being served is not as empowering as being able to provide back. And so I'm so excited that people are talking about mental health, because that means we can bring everybody together to say, look, there's a piece for you here.
Dacher, last
and I'm hopeful about change, and I think this conversation reflects that. Christina has been changing the workplace. Peter's been changing how we think about mental health. There's a lot of change going on in how we think about physical health. And Vivek Murthy, our Surgeon General, he did his work in public health, and he's interested in well-being as the driver of physical health. So there's a lot of change to start to bring about, and that is happening, that will help us respond to this pandemic.
I feel better already. I do. Just this conversation, I really want to thank the three of you for your time and your expertise, and just how much caring you obviously bring to your work. It was an important conversation, and glad you could join us.
Okay. Thank you, Dan.
And thanks to all of you who joined us for this campus conversation, and we looking forward to seeing you next time around. Have a great afternoon.